Archie Gamble here. Welcome to this edition of the Gamble Ramble vlog. With you, as always, is myself, host and creator, Glenn Archie Gamble. I am a 40-year career musician, 40 plus years actually, 42 years this year. Working musician from London, Ontario, Canada, about 2 hours from Toronto, halfway between Toronto and Detroit, right in the middle. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. And if you're a subscriber and a follower, welcome back. Thank you for your support and returning. If you are new here and you like what you see, do me a favor. We can start out by asking you real quick to just click subscribe. It helps the channel enormously, and it's free. So yeah, on this channel we basically talk about my career in music and rock and roll and literature, and, movies and pop culture, and I interview some of my famous musician friends. It's just a place to gather with like-minded people and discuss rock and roll stories. I tell some road stories, and it's pretty cool. We have some fun here, So I appreciate you stopping by. Thank you. Here to see you. An excuse to take a drink of Coca-Cola. It's one vice I got left in my life, so. But I digress already. Anyway, today I want to talk about a subject that occurred to me today. I'm sure you're the same way out there. Sometimes when you're out doing things, shopping or whatever, and you're not really necessarily concentrating, and a thought or an idea will come to you. In the shower, it happens to me as well. And I was thinking about the period of time where, grunge music came and basically killed hair metal. And of course that did happen, and of course it had to happen because a lot of hard rock hair music at that point was becoming just ridiculous, like these shitty bands like Tough and, just these faceless, nameless bands with, they were just, third-rate copies of the original Sunset Strip hair bands that were actually good. Motley Crue and Rat and, even Poison. Poison were not the greatest musicians or whatever in the world, but they wrote catchy songs, and there was a direct lineage to New York Dolls, And then, of course, as these things happen, the music industry has some success with those bands, and then they start signing, lukewarm carbon copies of those bands. And then, by around 1991, September 24th, 1991, Nevermind by Nirvana came out. And that's pretty much considered the watershed moment for the change in the grunge, and then Alice in Chains had some hit records, and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and all these bands, and came and swept away what had become just really average, boring hair rock music, But here's the thing I want to talk about today. It occurred to me, within the hair band hard rock community itself tried to press the reset button. And there were bands that were fighting against the cheesy benchmark of being, if you had long hair Marshall amps, it equaled Taiketo or Pretty Boy Floyd or whoever, You know what I'm trying to say? There were bands that had long hair, Marshall amps, and all the trappings of hair metal and hard rock, but were good hard rock bands, and they weren't subscribing to the cliches of the Bon Jovi choruses and you know what I'm trying to say, right? Like, I'll try and be a little more articulate. By the time an album like Nirvana's Nevermind came along, anything that was guitar-based hard rock, Warrant and all that stuff, and even though they had some good songs, it was just formulaic, put the band members in the the fake leather pants, the ones I'm talking about that look like plastic and leather, get a stylist in, and the hair, and it just lost all credibility, and musically it was just regurgitated nonsense. But within their community, there were bands that fought back and tried to keep it the real essence of what we loved about hard rock music, which is, to this day, I'm a classic traditionalist hard rocker. Give me a Marshall amp, a stack of amp pegs, a double bass kit, long hair, produced some loud rock and roll. Van Halen, the first Van Halen record, the first few all Van Halen records with David Lee Roth, basically. But yeah, around the time of 89, 90, 91, there were a series of bands that said, you know what, we're taking this back from the cheese rock bands. And, the Four Horsemen, friends of mine who I've toured with, the Black Crowes' first album around the same time came out. London Choir Boys, Junkyard, Little Caesar, these bands that had the trappings, the cool trappings of rock and roll and hard rock and even hair metal, you want to call it. But there was some substance to the songwriting, and the image was still cool. It wasn't this diluted cartoon that it became. So basically, the point I'm trying to make is this, okay? And bear with me. People say that it basically categorically went like this. There was all this hair metal. 91, Nirvana crushed it, and then it was all grunge. Which is, in the larger picture, essentially true. Except that for a period of time there, overlapping from 89 to about 91, there were bands that were fighting back, saying, wait a minute, rock and roll is still alive. You can still have Marshall amps on stage, long hair, wear your guitar down your knees and be cool without being a caricature. Guns N' Roses. You know what I'm trying to say? And there was a period of time. And that's what I'd like to talk about today, how it's often overlooked in the annals of rock and roll history, how we just basically kind of we skip in the story from, Warrant and the strip bands being crushed by Nirvana. Well, here in the middle, which is often the best place to be, there is a whole other story. Now, as I've gotten further along in my career, I've gotten to know some of the musicians from some of these bands that I've already mentioned, and kind of discussed this with them. And it's like, you know what? Yeah, it was a movement. It was a conscious movement to keep what was good about hard rock, hair metal, again, for that expression, but it is apt and it's a shortcut, a verbal shortcut, and just kind of boil it down to its essence. Hell, even look at going back earlier to the White Snake Slide In album and bands like Thin Lizzy and stuff like that. They were hair bands, technically speaking, while a bunch of hair bags with loud Marshalls and amp pegs, but the songs were blues based and had substance to them, and so this around 90, 89, 90, 91, we started to kind of see that cycle back in, which made me very happy. I was very much a fan of that kind of stuff, As I said, the first Black Crowes record, although the Crowes have tried to distance themselves from anything to do with hard rock, it was a hard rock album in that, like I said, some wide open Marshalls and, hard-hitting rhythm section. It's rock and roll, but it's got elements of hard rock in it as well, And I know this is a very personal thing we're discussing. It's a very personal preference, and, you might be someone that loves bands like Warrant and also loves bands like, Junkyard and Little Caesar and the bands I've mentioned. I'm not here to tell anyone they can't like anything. What I'm talking about, though, is that how these bands are kind of written off, and people forget that they did try and actually take hard rock back from the Cheese Monsters, you know what I mean? It was, and then for a little while, there was a window open where it did, these bands had some success, but it was such a small niche that it never really caught on and kept hard rock healthy and alive. Because all of a sudden you see, Warrant wearing flannel shirts and photo shoots and growing their hair down instead of up, and drop D tuning in songs, and all these bands were trying to become what they weren't, which was, alternative grunge with alternative and grunge leanings. And it was so transparent that the public never bought it. If you look into this, you watch videos on YouTube and read books about the music industry and stuff from this era, there were several bands that had gold or platinum records prior to the grunge movement, who had just finished recording a new record, to find that the label dropped them and shelved the album after putting like 300 grand into some of these records. That's how quick and overnight the movement was. That a lot of these bands just lost their deals because it was completely swept away, you know. And some of you won't agree with me, but I think it rightfully so, because it did become such a caricature of, you know, hair and clothes and, you know, maybe baby lyrics, right? You know, it just, the substance was gone. But it didn't go without a fight, is what I'm saying. And I hope that people recognize this, you know. I personally, that was my wheelhouse. Still is. I love that merger of hard rock, rock and roll, and kind of bluesy stuff, you know. Tattoos, leather, and you know. Those are things to me that will never go out of style, you know. Look at a young artist like Youngblood these days, right? He's discovering that little black eyeliner, black pants, and a slit open shirt, you know, goes a long way marketing and image-wise. And people that otherwise wouldn't have listened to him a few years ago when he was wearing skirts and stockings on stage are now going, hey, well, Ozzy thought Youngblood was cool. Let's give him a chance.
For you, conquer America. Like.
That's it, man. That's the goal. That's the fucking plan.
Gotta conquer America.
And then the world.
That's the next goal, baby.
Stop.
Just keep going.
Yeah, man.
Don't give in.
No, man, never. It's gonna be fucking epic, man. Love yours.
So to clarify, you can see what I'm talking about, the importance of image. It is so important because Youngblood a couple years before was kind of a pansexual kind of image on stage and in press. And, you know, he realized that that would work with European and British culture. Kids are more open-minded. But North America, you know, if you want to crack rock radio and stuff like that, you kind of got to be a little more of a traditionalist. So with Ozzy getting behind him and adding a few more guitars to his sound, which hasn't changed that much, by completely revamping the image, he was ready and very smart about trying to take a proper swing at the American market. And there you go. Changing your look has a lot to do with helping your act survive. So there is that aspect to it. There's just the image, you know. But I really believe that a lot of these bands, you know, really believed in hard rock music and really did want to try and save it or resuscitate it, you know. You know, Ron Young, the great singer for Little Caesar, is a friend of mine. And he toured with the Four Horsemen on vocals when we toured together. I talked to him, you know, I kind of talked around the subject. We weren't this specific as I'm being now, but yeah, you know, they just were guys from LA that didn't like the synthetic, you know, deliberate marketing of Warrant and bands like that. But they liked loud guitars, they had long hair, and they liked to play sweaty rock and roll. You know, and there's something to be said for that. There's a real space in my heart for anyone that believes in music and puts it all out there, leaves it all out on stage, you know. So let me ask you, if you've come this far and you're watching this whole thing, tell me in the comments some of those bands you feel that kind of bordered rock and roll and hair rock, if that makes sense, and had elements that allowed them to kind of separate themselves from the pack of hair metal bands. If you can think of anyone you love that fits that kind of description, let me know in the comments, and we'll discuss it. You know, I can tell you, I saw the Black Crowes on the first album tour. The Black Crowes Shake Your Moneymaker record, to me, is a classic. And I know it's very derivative of Stones and Faces and early Aerosmith and Humble Pie and stuff like that. Well, that's great. That's all the stuff I love. I think it's all those things wrapped up into one magic silver bullet. You know, what a fucking great album that is. And man, did they ever look like a fucking cool bunch of rock and rollers, didn't they? the velvet, the leather, the cool clothes, you know, a touch of eyeliner like Keith Richards style eyeliner, you know. That was a great rock and roll band, and I saw them on that first tour. They were touring with Robert Plant. They had a night off, and they played a club here in town called Kipling's. And I was right up front. Actually, I hung out with them before the show. I went over to the strip club next door while the opening band was on. Our band, Buffalo Brothers, we tried to get the opening spot, and we didn't. So I had boycotted the opening band, and I went next door, and the guys at the Black Crowes were there, and I got to sit down and talk to them. They invited me to join them for a drink. I sat down and talked to them about rock and roll and music. And then I went over, and they kicked my ass. I was right in the front row, and I'll never forget, Rich Robinson had 3 full Marshall stacks on stage, 6 cabinets, the white silver Jubilees, just deafeningly loud, and I was right in front of his cabinets. I could hear worse than usual for, you know, days afterwards. And most of the stuff was in open G tuning, which I love, you know, the 5-string open G Telecaster sound that Keith Richards perfected. And they were just great, but they were still a hard rock band. You know what I mean? I know after the next album, you know, Southern Harmony, which is a fucking classic also. And then they started kind of move away from that kind of short economical songwriting and get into more jam band stuff. And they lost me after Southern Harmony out. Morica was good, but then they started to get kind of diluted in that whole Grateful Dead hippie bullshit. But while they still owned it, and they still had that attitude of a hard rock band with, you know, loud guitars, you know, that to me is my wheelhouse. That's the kind of music I love. You know, that's where hard rock should have gone as far as I'm concerned. And of course, who to blame for this is the record companies, because, you know, like look at a band like Poison, who I like. I've met the guys, and they're really nice people. I've been guests backstage at the show, so I'm not going to talk shit about them. Ricky Rocky in particular is a great guy. I've always drawn a line between them and, like, the New York Dolls, okay? Which has always made me think of Poison as being different than the rest of the hair bands. And the rest of them, of course, they became successful. They were on a small underdog label. Capitol distributed it, and then the album exploded. It cost next to nothing to record, and it went triple platinum or something at that time. And now, let's get us another one of those Poisons. And all of a sudden, we were flooded with bullshit pop, metal, light bands, you know, with too much makeup and not enough talent. And of course, being the music industry, this is what they do. If one is good, then 20 must be better, right? And they flooded the market with this shit. It just became watered down. And by 90, 89 even, 91, music fans were saying we've had enough. And musicians were saying we've had enough. You know, Alice in Chains used to be called Alice and Chains. And they were a glam band. Pantera were a glam band. They had the big hair, spandex. All these bands did. They saw the future coming. They saw that it was being diluted so badly by the record industry and these bands. They said, you know what, we got to take metal back and hard rock back in a different direction. And thank God they did, you know. And again, bands like Guns N' Roses, many elements of hard rock, heavy metal, hair rock in that. Look at some of the early, you know, they look like the New York Dolls in some of the early pictures, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say to close this off is that we did, you know, and at the time I was a young musician with our band writing and recording music, we did fight back. We tried to save the glory that is hard rock. And a lot of bands did. And then grunge just came and swept everything by the wayside. And, you know, I can look at it with hindsight now. If you listen to Nevermind by Nirvana, Nevermind, pun intended, looking at the pictures of the artwork of the videos, just listen. It's guitar, rock and roll. It all is. That's why classic rock radio today plays Alice in Chains, Bon Jovi, blah, blah, blah. You know, stuff always floats. Like, the good stuff always floats to the top, right? And it is just guitar music. It's all hard rock or guitar rock and roll. And I'm thankful for that. And as I get older, I realize that we were really being manipulated by marketing and record companies and stuff like that. But there were some bands I feel that really deserved a more fair share in that realm, within the realm of marketing and budgets and marketing budgets and tour support and push on MTV and radio. You know, these hard rock bands that were kept it sweaty and real. And as I said, the essential elements, you know, like a Gibson or a Fender, Marshall's cabinet behind you, black leather pants, little bit of Keith Richards eye makeup, some tattoos, some sweat, and away you go, boy. You're a rock and roll star, you know. So thanks for listening, and tell me what you think. Maybe you think I'm way off base. Let me know in the comments below. Give me your opinion of, the great hard rock scare of 89 to 91, where bands fought back with more bluesy, traditional hard rock and tried to steal it away from the glam metal, pop metal musicians before grunge came and killed it all off. And as always, if you haven't, please subscribe. I would appreciate it. It's free. And if you can leave a comment below, as I said, or a like, you can leave me a super thanks, which is a little financial gift. Just click that button. And you can also support me on my Patreon page, which I will leave in the description below. So thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen. Rock and roll will never die. Here's to you. And here's to me. If ever we should disagree, I think you know the rest, but here's to you.